Hey folks, tonight we're diving straight into the chaotic, absurd, and wildly unpredictable world of ancient entertainment. The kind where survival was optional, logic took the day off, and your worst nightmare probably had front row seats. But before we plunge headfirst into this historical madness, hit that like button only if you truly enjoy strange tales from the past, and smash that subscribe button if you're ready for a wild ride through forgotten history with a touch of dark humor. Oh, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. It's always fun seeing this global community coming together for these bizarre stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe grab a snack, preferably one that doesn't remind you of wild animals, and let's ease into tonight's twisted journey. Because what we're about to explore makes modern sports look like a tea party, and reality shows seem like polite dinner conversations. Welcome to the brutal stage of ancient Mesopotamia's grand festivals, a place where chaos was scripted, survival was a bonus, and spectacle was everything. Picture this: towering stone amphitheaters packed with roaring crowds, the desert sun turning the arena floor into a scorching oven, and at the center of it all, unfortunate souls armed with questionable equipment, facing trials that were less about honor and more about entertaining a restless empire. Long before Rome turned violence into theater, the city-state of Uruk in Mesopotamia was already crafting its own peculiar brand of public spectacle. And no, it wasn't just about who was the strongest. It was about who could fall the most dramatically, who could bleed artistically, and who could turn a desperate scramble for survival into primetime entertainment. The rulers of Uruk, ever desperate to distract their citizens from things like famine, political scandals, or the occasional failed harvest, devised elaborate public games that merged myth, punishment, and performance. You didn't attend these events to see a fair contest. You came to watch controlled chaos unfold, with just enough unpredictability to keep your pulse racing. The amphitheater wasn't just stone and sand. It was an open-air arena of human theater where failure was guaranteed, and the only thing more important than victory was how loudly the audience gasped when someone met their fate. Now let's set the stage properly. Uruk's great festivals were ostensibly religious celebrations, dedicated to the gods of war, fertility, and harvest. But peel back the ceremonial garlands, and you'd find an event that was part punishment, part pageantry, and entirely unhinged. The so-called Trials of the Fallen were an annual occurrence, where the condemned, the indebted, or just the politically inconvenient found themselves enrolled in a contest they never volunteered for. And trust me, you didn't need to be a hardened warrior to earn a spot. Sometimes all it took was missing your temple tithe or accidentally offending the wrong bureaucrat. Participants, if we can call them that, were thrust into an arena designed to mimic the mythical battlegrounds of Mesopotamian legend. They weren't armed with swords forged by master smiths. No, they were handed things like jagged farming tools, oversized slings, or wooden clubs so warped they resembled more of an artistic statement than a weapon. And while they stumbled into the blazing arena, the crowd cheered not for their skill, but for the guaranteed disaster about to unfold. It wasn't just humans they faced either. The zookeepers of Uruk were infamous for their collection of exotic beasts: lions from the plains beyond the rivers, giant hyenas bred for aggression, and in one truly questionable decision, an elephant painted gold, which turned out to be both impractical and wildly distracting. The condemned were left to compete against these creatures in staged hunts where survival wasn't really the goal. Entertainment was. The more spectacular the stumble, the more outrageous the gore, the louder the applause. And let's talk about the crowd. This wasn't a quiet, somber audience reflecting on the meaning of justice. These were thousands of sunburnt citizens, hopped up on barley beer, howling for more carnage. The nobles watched from shaded pavilions, fanning themselves and wagering on how quickly someone might be trampled, while the common folk filled the stone benches, shouting unsolicited advice to participants who barely knew which end of their weapon was the business side. But the trials weren't random bloodbaths. They were designed with just enough structure to maintain the illusion of ritual. It began with the Dance of the Doomed, where the unlucky entrants were paraded around the arena, clad in exaggerated costumes representing figures from Mesopotamian myths. One might be dressed as Gilgamesh, another as the monstrous Humbaba, though the outcome was always the same: humiliation, danger, and almost certain defeat. Some of the condemned were volunteers, believe it or not. Not because they were brave, but because success, however unlikely, promised wealth, fame, and in some rare cases the pardon of past crimes. Imagine being a fisherman who accidentally sold spoiled fish to a temple priest. Your punishment? Fight a leopard with a fishing net in front of 20,000 spectators, all hoping you trip over your own feet. But not all participants were human. The organizers, always seeking new ways to escalate the absurdity, began introducing engineered obstacles into the arena. Collapsing platforms, hidden pitfalls, mechanical devices designed to launch participants through the air, all meticulously planned to turn even a well-fought contest into slapstick tragedy. Think of it as ancient Mesopotamian reality TV, but with real stakes and fewer commercials. Even the arena itself was a marvel of cruel engineering. Beneath the sun-baked sands lay an intricate network of tunnels, cages, and trapdoors operated by teams of slaves and overseers. At any moment, the ground could split open, releasing an enraged animal, a plume of smoke, or worse, another unlucky participant shoved into the fray without warning. It was spectacle layered upon spectacle. Each unexpected twist a reminder that in Uruk, control belonged not to fate, but to those pulling the levers behind the scenes. And just when you thought the madness couldn't escalate further, the festival planners unveiled their pièce de résistance, the flooded reckoning. Yes, despite being nowhere near an ocean, the organizers figured out how to channel water from the nearby rivers to flood the arena. They crafted miniature boats, armed participants with paddles and spears, and forced them into mock naval battles that were less about strategy and more about watching desperate individuals capsize spectacularly while the crowd laughed and cheered. These so-called battles rarely resembled historical conflicts. Instead, they devolved into chaotic splashing, panicked flailing, and the occasional accidental self-inflicted injury. But did the audience care about accuracy? Of course not. They cared about the drama, the gasps, the missteps, the poetic irony of a man dressed as a god falling overboard and disappearing beneath the murky waters, never to surface again. The flooded reckoning wasn't just about humiliation, it was a statement. A reminder that in Uruk, power was performative and even nature itself could be manipulated for the sake of entertainment. The rulers controlled the rivers, the games, and the fates of those within the arena. And the people? They watched, laughed, and momentarily forgot the hardships beyond the arena walls. But the organizers weren't done innovating. No. When water and wild beasts lost their shock value, they turned to the realm of myth and creative executions disguised as theater. Condemned participants were cast in twisted reenactments of ancient legends. Imagine being dressed as Enkidu, only to be pursued by exaggerated divine beasts, constructed from papier-mâché and real fangs. Or being strapped into contraptions designed to mimic the flight of mythical creatures, only for the device to malfunction gloriously mid-air. The line between justice and spectacle blurred entirely. The citizens of Uruk weren't watching punishment. They were watching curated chaos, finely tuned to balance brutality with absurdity. It wasn't about fairness. It wasn't even about retribution. It was about keeping the crowd engaged, distracted, and clamoring for more. As the festivals grew in scale and complexity, so too did the lengths organizers went to surprise the audience. Blindfolded combat, mismatched duels, and absurd challenges became staples of the games. One participant might be handed a wooden ladle and expected to fend off an opponent armed with a ceremonial axe. Another might be shackled to a stranger, forced to coordinate every panicked step while the crowd roared with laughter at their misfortune. And in the grandest twist of all, sometimes the crowd decided the fate of those in the arena. Cheers could grant mercy, while jeers sealed a participant's doom. It was ancient democracy by applause, with consequences as real as they were theatrical. But let's not forget the wild boars, the surprise addition that nobody expected yet everyone adored. Muscular, furious, and armed with tusks sharp enough to pierce bronze, these animals were unleashed into the chaos, turning already disastrous scenarios into complete mayhem. The sight of a seasoned fighter slipping on the arena floor, only to be bowled over by a charging boar, brought the house down every time. To the people of Uruk, unpredictability wasn't a flaw, it was the main attraction. The more absurd, dangerous, and unexpected the event, the more engaged the crowd became. It was public control wrapped in entertainment, a carefully constructed illusion where violence, myth, and performance collided under the desert sun. And so, the Trials of the Fallen became not just an annual event, but a cornerstone of Mesopotamian culture, a spectacle so grand, so bizarre, and so ruthlessly entertaining that even centuries later, historians struggle to separate fact from theatrical fiction. As the Trials of the Fallen etched themselves deeper into the identity of Uruk, the spectacle evolved from a simple display of chaotic punishment into an art form that bordered on the ridiculous. Every year, the city's elite schemed new ways to escalate the grandeur, as if the universe itself had handed them a blank canvas soaked in sand, sweat, and blood. The citizens didn't just anticipate the games, they demanded them. Vendors sold tokens shaped like miniature weapons. Children played make-believe as doomed heroes, and poets composed verses so dramatic they could barely recite them without bursting into exaggerated sobs. The entire city transformed into a living theater, its alleys buzzing with rumors of who would face the arena next and what absurd new twist the organizers had devised to outdo themselves. Among the many spectacles that arose from this insatiable hunger for novelty was the notorious Festival of Bones, a week-long event that celebrated defeat, failure, and humiliation with as much enthusiasm as victory. The rulers, perhaps sensing the empire's fraying patience with mundane rituals, concocted the festival as both a distraction and a brutal reminder that power thrived in performance, not fairness. The opening day was a parade unlike any other, with participants, many of them condemned, some unfortunate volunteers, and a few hopeless dreamers, marched through the city, adorned in elaborate costumes mimicking mythical creatures, ancient gods, or exaggerated caricatures of themselves. They wore masks of painted clay, heavy with symbolism and irony, each crafted to foreshadow the farce awaiting them in the arena. The Festival of Bones earned its name not just from the brittle remnants left scattered across the blood-stained sands, but from the signature contest that defined the event, the Gauntlet of Collapse. It was a brutal, sprawling obstacle course where participants navigated a labyrinth of precarious scaffolding, hidden pits, spinning platforms, and inevitably, wild animals unleashed with gleeful timing. The rules were simple: survive the course, entertain the masses, and if possible, don't shatter every limb in the process. Of course, very few succeeded in all three. The gauntlet wasn't designed for fairness. It was designed for failure, where the act of stumbling, falling, and narrowly avoiding disaster became the highest form of entertainment. As the sun blazed down upon the arena, transforming the sand into searing embers beneath bare feet, the crowd roared with anticipation. They wagered coins, food, and even favors on who might make it past the first obstacle. A rickety bridge suspended over a pit teeming with vipers, which were, as tradition dictated, drugged just enough to stagger but still capable of delivering a deadly bite. Those who faltered here became instant legends of mockery, their names chanted in jest as cautionary tales. For the few who stumbled across, the challenges only worsened. Platforms slick with oil, walls designed to collapse unexpectedly, nets that ensnared rather than protected, all meticulously placed to maximize chaos and minimize dignity. The organizers, ever committed to pushing boundaries, added new features each year. One year, the arena floor split open mid-course, revealing a pit filled with mud and flailing livestock, forcing participants to navigate through squawking birds and furious goats. Another year, oversized catapults launched participants from one platform to another, with varying degrees of success and injury. The crowd adored the unpredictability. The messier the fall, the more dramatic the scramble, the greater the applause. It wasn't about athleticism, it was about theatrical failure on the grandest scale imaginable. But perhaps the most infamous element of the Festival of Bones was the introduction of the Harbinger beast, a creature shrouded in secrecy until its grand reveal. The Harbinger was different each year, sometimes a rare predator imported from distant lands, other times a monstrous hybrid bred in secrecy, its grotesque form designed to terrify and awe in equal measure. One year, the harbinger was a black-furred hyena with exaggerated fangs, rumored to be cursed by temple priests. Another, it was a towering tusked creature so aggressive that its handlers refused to enter the arena without shields. The appearance of the harbinger marked the climax of the gauntlet, the final, near-impossible hurdle between humiliation and fleeting glory. Facing the harbinger wasn't merely a test of skill, it was a test of improvisation and, frankly, comedic timing. Participants flailed, stumbled, and deployed every ounce of misplaced confidence they could muster as they confronted a beast designed to dismantle them physically and mentally. Some attempted to outwit it with absurd distractions, a shiny object, exaggerated gestures, or by playing dead so convincingly the audience laughed themselves breathless. On rare occasions, one participant triumphed, taming the beast or surviving long enough for the organizers to grant mercy. Those few emerged as folk heroes, their tales exaggerated in taverns, their likenesses carved into amulets sold at street markets, though most faded into obscurity as quickly as they stumbled off the arena floor. But make no mistake, survival didn't guarantee safety. The rulers ensured that even those who lived through the gauntlet remained indebted to the spectacle. Winners were paraded through the streets, hailed as champions by day, yet constantly reminded that their fate still rested on the Empire's whims. They became mascots of misfortune, symbols of controlled chaos, paraded before the masses to reinforce the illusion that anyone could rise, so long as they were willing to risk utter destruction for the crowd's amusement. Meanwhile, the organizers, emboldened by the success of the Festival of Bones, expanded their ambitions beyond mere physical contests. They introduced mythical reenactments, grand performances where condemned individuals portrayed legendary figures from Mesopotamian folklore, only for the narrative to twist into an elaborate, often fatal display of irony. Imagine being dressed as a revered warrior king, only to bungle through a staged battle, tripping over props as the audience cackled at the reversal of destiny, or being cast as a goddess of victory, only to be unceremoniously dumped into a pit of writhing snakes at the tale's conclusion. It was public theater at its most vicious, a performance of power where history, myth, and dark humor collided under the desert sun. The spectacle wasn't just about punishing the condemned. It was about reminding every spectator that their fate was a performance, subject to the Empire's design, and that even in triumph, one could be reduced to a joke, a fleeting moment of entertainment consumed and forgotten by the end of the day. And so, year after year, the Festival of Bones endured, evolving into a tradition as revered as it was grotesque, a testament to humanity's boundless appetite for chaos, absurdity, and the thin veil of control that masked the relentless unpredictability of life within the Empire. As the Empire of Uruk continued to refine its obsession with orchestrated calamity, it wasn't long before the ruling class discovered their next great source of amusement: the common citizens' complete and utter lack of preparation for combat. The trials of the fallen, the Festival of Bones, these had already proven how much the people craved chaos, wrapped in the illusion of structure. But nothing ignited the crowd's appetite for absurdity more than witnessing an untrained, bewildered person thrown into battle against a professional fighter, or worse, an unpredictable animal with a reputation for dismantling human anatomy with enthusiastic efficiency. It became known as the Theater of the Unprepared, a twisted tradition where individuals with no business wielding a weapon were handed crude instruments of war and shoved into the arena with the same ceremony as seasoned warriors. The beauty, or the horror, depending on one's perspective of this tradition, was its unpredictability. Participants weren't always criminals or political pariahs. Sometimes they were ordinary laborers, unsuspecting merchants, or citizens who made the grave mistake of volunteering for what they assumed was a harmless civic duty. Their professions varied widely: a spice seller, a brickmaker, an apprentice scribe, all united by the shared misfortune of standing on the arena floor with a weapon they barely knew how to hold, much less swing with authority. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't even about punishment. It was about watching the inevitable unfold in the most dramatic, theatrical fashion possible. The process began with what the organizers affectionately called the ceremony of illusions. Participants were dressed in garish, exaggerated costumes, often designed to mock their station in life. A scribe might wear an oversized quill and inkwell dangling from their belt, while a bread merchant would be adorned with dangling loaves and flour smudged across their tunic. The goal was to amplify the absurdity, transforming the arena floor into a stage where reality and satire collided, and every stumble, every panicked glance, was met with raucous laughter from the stands. Their opponents, meanwhile, were chosen with meticulous precision. Seasoned fighters, veterans of countless arena duels, individuals trained not only in combat, but in the art of prolonging a match for maximum entertainment. These warriors weren't there to kill immediately. They were there to orchestrate a slow, humiliating unraveling of their unprepared adversaries, drawing out the suspense, heightening the spectacle, and feeding the crowd's insatiable appetite for drama. They wielded polished weapons, executed flawless footwork, and engaged in theatrical flourishes designed to dazzle the audience while their opponents flailed helplessly. But even the best-laid performances were subject to the chaos inherent in the theater of the unprepared. Occasionally, pure luck or sheer panic propelled a novice to unexpected victory, or at least survival. A misplaced swing might accidentally disarm the professional. A desperate dive could send both fighters tumbling to the ground, blurring the lines between planned humiliation and genuine disaster. When these moments occurred, the crowd erupted with glee, relishing the disruption of expectation, the spontaneous elevation of the underdog, however brief. The rulers, ever eager to capitalize on the unpredictability, began introducing additional layers of complexity. Hidden mechanisms beneath the arena floor triggered sudden environmental changes, a pit opening mid-fight, a gust of sand obscuring vision, or the unexpected appearance of wild animals released from concealed cages. The audience adored these surprises, their cheers echoing across the amphitheater as chaos escalated, turning even the simplest duel into a sprawling, unmanageable disaster. One infamous account tells of a young merchant's apprentice, barely of age, pressed into the arena still wearing his market apron. His opponent, a renowned champion known for dispatching adversaries with ruthless precision, towered over him with practiced arrogance. But as fate would have it, a trapdoor malfunctioned mid-battle, releasing a swarm of startled birds that filled the arena with feathers and confusion. In the chaos, the apprentice stumbled, his clumsy strike landing squarely against the champion's helmet, knocking him senseless. The crowd erupted in disbelief and joy, the underdog's accidental victory becoming legend, a rare reminder that in Uruk's arena, even orchestrated humiliation could falter under the weight of the unexpected. It was precisely this blend of calculated theater and genuine unpredictability that cemented the theater of the unprepared as a staple of the Empire's grand festivals. The citizens flocked to the games, eager to witness the next hapless soul thrust into the spotlight, their dignity stripped away by circumstance and spectacle. For the rulers, it was a masterstroke, a distraction, a demonstration of power, and a testament to their ability to turn ordinary people into unwilling performers in a narrative of chaos. But as the games grew in scale and notoriety, so too did the ambitions of the organizers. They introduced new props, elaborate set pieces, and outlandish costumes that turned the arena floor into a living, breathing stage of surreal combat. Participants were handed mismatched weapons, a shield the size of a coin, a sword so heavy it dragged along the sand, and sent into battle against opponents wielding fully functional arms. Others were blindfolded, shackled, or forced to fight tethered to one another, stumbling in synchronized panic as the crowd howled with delight. It wasn't long before the theater expanded beyond human combat. Animals, both real and artificial, were woven into the performances. Mechanical contraptions designed to mimic legendary beasts rolled across the arena, their exaggerated features and awkward movements adding a layer of absurdity to the mayhem. Meanwhile, handlers unleashed actual creatures from hidden compartments, their unpredictable behavior injecting genuine danger into an otherwise orchestrated display of controlled collapse. For the participants, the theater was an ordeal of humiliation, terror, and, for the exceptionally lucky, fleeting fame. For the crowd, It was an irresistible fusion of comedy and catastrophe, a reminder that no matter how ordinary one's life seemed, chaos could strike at any moment, transforming bakers into warriors, merchants into mock heroes, and scribes into cautionary tales, all beneath the unrelenting gaze of a society that prized spectacle above all. The Empire, in its infinite appetite for novelty, continued to refine the tradition, layering complexity upon absurdity, ensuring that the theater of the unprepared remained a cornerstone of Uruk's grand, chaotic festivals, a living testament to humanity's love affair with watching the untrained, the unlucky, and the utterly bewildered stumble into history for the amusement of the masses. The theater of the unprepared was not the only place where chaos reigned supreme within the Empire's thirst for twisted entertainment. As the crowds grew restless for fresh spectacles, the organizers, ever scheming in their marble halls and smoky chambers, resurrected an ancient tradition whispered in the corners of Uruk's marketplaces and inked into half-forgotten tablets buried beneath temple floors. It was called the Hunt of Shadows and Sand, and it turned the familiar arena into a shifting, unpredictable wilderness where both beasts and participants lost their sense of control, and the lines between predator and prey blurred with every gust of wind. Unlike the rigid public battles where the crowd dictated the narrative, this hunt promised no structure, no guaranteed survival, and no facade of fairness. It was, quite simply, raw improvisation under the desert sun. The arena itself transformed into an elaborate facsimile of the wild, a sprawling maze of artificial dunes, jagged rocks, and crumbling ruins that stretched across the vast floor like a forgotten wasteland. Imported sand, blackened stones from distant volcanic fields, and towering wooden constructs mimicking ancient temples loomed over the grounds, creating an eerie illusion of an untamed world, all meticulously designed to confound those thrust into its heart. The participants? A mix of condemned individuals, unwitting volunteers, and occasionally overconfident soldiers eager to display their prowess. Each promised riches, redemption, or glory, though the unspoken truth lingered in every whispered conversation. Few ever walked out unscathed, and fewer still with their pride intact. The hunt began not with the clash of swords or the roar of beasts, but with silence, a suffocating stillness as the grand gates creaked open, revealing the first wave of participants stepping hesitantly into the labyrinth of sand and shadow. They carried mismatched weapons, spears too short to keep danger at bay, shields too brittle to offer protection, and in some cases, absurd items like nets, ropes, or sharpened sticks, better suited for comedy than survival. The crowd, packed into the stone seats above, leaned forward with bated breath, waiting for the inevitable chaos to unfold beneath them like a living, breathing play written in real time. And then the shadows moved. From concealed chambers hidden beneath the false dunes and hollow structures emerged the creatures, wild, furious, and as unpredictable as the Empire itself. Packs of jackals, sleek and cunning, slipped between the ruins. Massive cats, lean and scarred, prowled the periphery, their golden eyes gleaming in the harsh sunlight. Birds of prey circled overhead, their cries slicing through the dry air like spectral warnings. The hunters had become the hunted, and the audience drank in every moment of confusion, terror, and improvisation. But the hunt of shadows and sand was never just about the beasts. It was about spectacle, layers of spectacle. Mechanisms triggered at strategic intervals sent plumes of smoke rising into the air, collapsing walls to shift the labyrinth's design, and at the height of the performance, releasing the apex predators from hidden gates with all the subtlety of an earthquake. These creatures were not common, rumored imports from foreign lands fed carefully, conditioned for aggression, their very presence designed to send a chill down the spine of even the most seasoned observer. Stories echoed through the empire of a monstrous black-plumed bird, the size of a full-grown ram swooping down to snatch an unsuspecting participant off their feet, or of a sand-colored beast with 6 legs and eyes that glowed in the dark corners of the arena, stalking its prey with terrifying patience. Some whispered that the Empire's priests had begun dabbling in forbidden breeding programs, fusing animal lineages to create creatures not born of nature, but of twisted ambition and unrestrained curiosity. The truth? Irrelevant. The spectacle? undeniable. The organizers spared no expense in keeping the crowd enthralled. Occasionally, they added manufactured hazards, swinging boulders, collapsing bridges, sections of the floor rigged to give way beneath an unwary foot. They placed treasure throughout the labyrinth, gleaming trinkets, symbolic tokens, false promises of safety to lure participants deeper into danger. It became a perverse game of risk and reward, with the crowd cheering for those brave or foolish enough to pursue fortune amidst certain doom. What made the hunt unique, however, was its refusal to adhere to a script. The organizers relinquished control after the initial release, allowing the chaos to unfold without interference. The beasts wandered where they pleased. The participants forged fleeting alliances, betrayed one another, or succumbed to panic. The labyrinth evolved, reshaped by shifting sands, hidden triggers, and the merciless sun beating down from above. Sometimes, entire groups disappeared without a trace, only for their belongings to be found days later, buried beneath a dune or tangled in a collapsed structure. The crowd adored the spectacle, perched high above the chaos, placing bets, sharing tales of past hunts, and reveling in the unpredictability of it all. They remembered the underdogs, the lone fisherman who, armed only with a rusted hook, survived 3 days by outwitting both beast and man. The scholar's apprentice who constructed a makeshift barricade from fallen debris, holding off predators until the sun set and the organizers declared him victorious. These fleeting legends fed the mythos of the hunt, reinforcing the Empire's grand illusion that even the powerless could, with enough wit or sheer luck, seize a moment of glory before the sand swallowed them whole. But beneath the surface, beneath the laughter and wagers, the hunt served a darker purpose. It was a reminder, a living demonstration of the Empire's control over chaos. No matter how wild the creatures, how unpredictable the arena, every element was engineered, every danger designed, every outcome ultimately orchestrated by those in power. The illusion of freedom, of choice, existed only within the boundaries drawn by the architects of the spectacle. And so, the hunt of shadows and sand endured, growing in scale, audacity, and legend with each passing year, cementing its place alongside the Empire's other grand displays of control disguised as entertainment, a living monument to humanity's insatiable hunger for spectacle, peril, and the comforting illusion that within the chaos, one might just emerge victorious. While the hunt of shadows and sand satisfied the Empire's craving for raw survival and chaos, there remained a separate hunger festering beneath the surface of Uruk's culture, an obsession with blending myth, humiliation, and grim artistry into one seamless performance. This is where the infamous ritual of mocked legends carved its bloody, absurd place into history. No longer content with simply watching condemned souls or unwitting volunteers stumble through wild terrain or fall before trained killers, the rulers devised a new tradition that elevated public execution into grotesque theater, merging folklore with fatal consequences. In these performances, the myths revered by the Empire, the stories of gods, heroes, and divine tragedies, were twisted into elaborate satirical reenactments, where the ending was never a triumphant return, but an orchestrated public downfall designed to entertain, terrify, and remind the masses that legend and reality were both tools of control. The ritual began at dusk, under the blood-red glow of the setting sun, when the arena transformed into a stage so meticulously crafted it rivaled the Empire's greatest temples. Wooden facades painted to resemble mythical landscapes rose from hidden compartments beneath the floor. Towers adorned with shimmering fabrics mimicked heavenly palaces, while mechanical constructs operated by unseen hands created illusions of flowing rivers, distant mountains, or burning fields. The craftsmanship was dazzling, an awe-inspiring distraction from the dark purpose these props served. And when the performance began, it carried with it the weight of cultural pride twisted into bitter irony. Participants were selected with a cruel attention to detail. Some were criminals awaiting execution, others were prisoners of war, and a select few were citizens who had offended powerful officials through arrogance, misstep, or merely existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Regardless of their origin, their fate was the same: to embody a revered figure from Uruk's rich tapestry of myth, dressed in ornate, exaggerated costumes that both celebrated and mocked the legend they were about to defile. The most infamous roles were those of the tragic heroes, figures like Uruk, the storm chaser swallowed by the sky, Avesha, the goddess who defied fate only to be turned to stone, and Vekral, the beast slayer whose own creation consumed him. These performances were never meant to honor the myths. They were designed to turn veneration into a spectacle of downfall. The condemned would act out the ancient tales, their lines fed to them by overseers, their movements directed by masked officials lurking in the shadows. But as the narrative approached its climax, the illusion shattered. Instead of a miraculous escape, a triumphant victory, or divine intervention, the participants met brutal, often absurd ends. A false wing would collapse mid-flight, sending the actor tumbling to the ground in exaggerated failure. A stone meant to symbolize divine punishment would be replaced with an actual boulder, ensuring the story's tragic finale was as real as it was irreversible. The crowd adored these twisted performances, delighting in the familiar stories warped into dark comedies where fate was as cruel as the rulers behind the curtains. Children recited the lines before the actors could. Merchants sold tokens depicting exaggerated versions of the myths, and poets composed verses so layered with satire that even the most devout priest might hesitate before condemning them outright. The ritual of mocked legends became a grotesque, yet indispensable celebration of power, a reminder that the empire controlled not only life and death, but the very narrative of existence. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the ritual was its scale. As years passed, the performances grew more elaborate, more ambitious, blending engineering with savagery in ways that bordered on the surreal. Entire sections of the arena floor were rigged to collapse at pivotal moments, sending participants plummeting into concealed pits. Mechanical beasts designed to mimic the monstrous figures of ancient tales lurched onto the stage with terrifying realism, operated by teams of workers hidden below the sands. Flames erupted on cue, storms of colored smoke billowed across the arena, and the boundaries between myth, theater, and fatal spectacle dissolved entirely. There were moments when the ritual spiraled beyond even the organizers' intentions. One legend recalls a performance where an actor portraying the skybound hero Corvian was strapped to an intricate pulley system meant to simulate flight. But a malfunction in the mechanism sent him soaring far beyond the designated path, crashing into the Imperial Pavilion in a chaotic explosion of feathers, wood, and stunned silence. The Emperor's laughter was reportedly louder than the crowd's cheers, and Corvian's tale has since been immortalized in songs as both a cautionary tale and comedic triumph. Despite the layers of absurdity, the underlying message was impossible to miss. The ritual of mocked legends was not merely for entertainment. It was a public declaration of dominion. By distorting the empire's most sacred stories, the rulers demonstrated their absolute authority over belief, tradition, and history itself. They could rewrite legends, redefine heroes, and twist divine intervention into a punchline, all while the masses cheered, laughed, and reveled in the carefully curated downfall. For those condemned to perform, there was no illusion of survival, no promise of redemption. Their brief, humiliating portrayal of a once revered figure was both a punishment and a warning, a living embodiment of the Empire's power to warp destiny. And though their names were forgotten, their failures echoed in the laughter gasps and songs of those who bore witness, reinforcing the grand illusion that control, even over myth, belonged to those who commanded the stage. Thus, with each passing year, the ritual evolved, adding new layers of grandeur, cruelty, and satire. It became not just a performance but a cornerstone of Uruk's cultural identity, a macabre fusion of theater, history, and spectacle where the downfall of heroes, both real and imagined, kept the empire entertained, distracted, and ever aware of who truly held the reins of power. As if the empire's appetite for sand-stained battles and theatrical bloodshed wasn't enough, the rulers of Uruk, masters of turning disaster into entertainment, devised one of their most audacious spectacles yet. It was called the Waters of Ruin, an event so wildly ambitious that even the most seasoned engineers whispered doubts behind temple columns. And yet, year after year, the grand flooded arena became one of the most anticipated chapters in the Empire's endless script of spectacle. The waters brought with them not only chaos but a level of calculated absurdity, unmatched by the Empire's other gruesome traditions, turning the amphitheater into an artificial sea, brimming with floating calamity and drenched in enough improvisational disasters to keep the crowd roaring with satisfaction. It began with the draining of the city's surrounding canals, a logistical nightmare cloaked as civic pride. The engineers rerouted rivers, constructed intricate channels, and funneled thousands upon thousands of liters of water into the arena's vast underground reservoirs, all while merchants complained about empty wells and farmers grumbled about parched fields. But for the rulers, there was no higher priority than transforming the dry sands of the amphitheater into a shallow, treacherous basin, a watery stage upon which incompetence and panic could play out like an orchestrated storm. The Waters of Ruin was no simple boat race. It was a chaotic, floating battlefield where groups of participants, mostly conscripted from prison cells or plucked from the unlucky crowds, were crammed onto makeshift vessels ranging from crudely assembled rafts to miniature top-heavy ships that barely floated. These boats were then pushed into the flooded arena, often tipping or listing before the starting horn even sounded, much to the crowd's delight. Armed with blunt spears, oars that doubled as shields, and shields that resembled dinner plates, the participants floundered across the water's surface, their every misstep magnified by the instability beneath them. The centerpiece of the event was its grand mock naval battle, designed less for strategy and more for visual spectacle. Boats collided haphazardly, participants stumbled into the shallows, and every flailing limb or misplaced weapon strike earned laughter and applause from the towering seats above. The illusion of military precision quickly dissolved into splashing chaos, with participants grappling more with staying afloat than with fighting their opponents. Some attempted to row in organized formation, only to spin in circles as their poorly constructed vessels refused to cooperate. Others abandoned their crafts entirely, opting to wade through waist-deep water in a desperate, often comedic attempt to outflank their adversaries. And if the unpredictable mechanics of floating death traps weren't enough, the organizers, masters of layered calamity, introduced further hazards to the aquatic stage. Mechanical sea creatures, operated by workers hidden beneath submerged platforms, lurched toward the combatants, their grotesque forms designed to mimic ancient river beasts from the Empire's folklore. Massive artificial serpents writhed just below the waterline, their gaping maws snapping harmlessly yet convincingly enough to send participants shrieking in every direction. Wooden constructs resembling monstrous fish breached the surface with exaggerated splashes, while oversized birds with mechanical wings swooped low, occasionally knocking unfortunate souls from their precarious perches. But not every threat was artificial. The Empire spared no expense importing real creatures from distant wetlands. Crocodiles with jaws powerful enough to split wood, aggressive waterfowl known to peck with unnerving precision, and once, to great controversy, a fully grown river buffalo that promptly overturned half the fleet upon its release. The crowd adored these moments, the blending of the real with the fabricated, the sudden spikes of genuine peril hidden beneath layers of orchestrated chaos. The line between entertainment and disaster was so thin it barely existed, and that uncertainty only fed the people's obsession. Participants fared no better when faced with the arena's mechanical sabotage. Sections of the flooded floor were designed to collapse, sending boats and their passengers plunging into concealed pits or unexpected currents engineered to spin vessels in dizzying spirals. Wooden planks dislodged beneath unsuspecting feet, sending entire groups tumbling into the shallows, limbs flailing, weapons scattering, all under the deafening roar of an audience insatiable for more. Victory in the Waters of Ruin was rarely a result of skill. It was survival through sheer luck, relentless improvisation, or the misfortune of one's competitors being even more hapless. As with all of Uruk's grand spectacles, the narrative of control was woven into every drop of water, every misplaced oar stroke, and every collapsing boat. The rulers orchestrated the conditions, manipulated the hazards, and reminded the masses that, within the Empire's carefully constructed chaos, survival itself was a performance granted only to those who entertained with enough desperation and absurdity to earn temporary favor. Even the most triumphant participant could find their fortune reversed with the pull of a lever or the opening of a hidden gate, and that constant threat of reversal kept both performer and spectator entranced. In time, the legacy of the Waters of Ruin extended beyond the arena's walls, seeping into the Empire's culture and daily life. Children crafted miniature boats from scraps, reenacting the chaotic battles in city fountains and flooded streets. Artists painted exaggerated scenes of panicked sailors and monstrous river beasts across temple walls. Street performers stumbled through comedic interpretations of the aquatic battles, their slapstick drowning imitating the grand spectacles witnessed by thousands each year. And yet, for all its humor and theatrical design, the Waters of Ruin was more than just entertainment. It stood as a monument to the Empire's unrivaled ability to transform vulnerability into performance, disaster into tradition, and the simple act of floating into a precarious, humiliating, unforgettable struggle for survival, all while the crowd cheered, laughed, and momentarily forgot the rising taxes, empty granaries, or rumors of war waiting beyond the city's gilded gates. Even after flooding their amphitheater, weaponizing myths, unleashing beasts, and turning incompetence into high art, the rulers of Uruk still found new, increasingly ridiculous ways to stretch the limits of public spectacle. And so emerged one of the cruelest, most absurd traditions to stain the Empire's calendar of grand performances: the Chains of the Damned. Born from the Empire's relentless drive to amplify both suffering and comedy, this event took the familiar concept of arena combat and twisted it into a farce so layered in humiliation that even the most hardened spectators couldn't look away. Here, participants weren't just fighting opponents. They were fighting the physical constraints designed to turn survival into a hilariously improbable, often painful balancing act. It began, as most of these spectacles did, with a parade through the city streets. Participants, ranging from condemned prisoners to foolish volunteers misled by promises of fame, were shackled together in groups, their wrists and ankles bound by iron chains of varying lengths and weights. Some chains barely allowed them to move independently. Others were so restrictive that participants had to shuffle in unison or risk collapsing in a tangled heap. They were dressed, as always, in exaggerated costumes, mocking their origins, their failures, or the mythical figures they had been assigned to portray. The crowd jeered, tossed scraps of food, and wagered on which unfortunate soul would stumble first. Once herded into the arena, the true absurdity began. The floor was littered with obstacles: slippery stones, shallow trenches, loose sand patches, and mechanical traps primed to trigger at the slightest misstep. In this chaotic environment, the shackled participants were expected to fight not only for survival, but for spectacle. Their opponents varied wildly, from trained gladiators wielding polished weapons to aggressive animals released at calculated intervals to maximize panic. The chains turned every coordinated movement into a test of improvisation, transforming even the simplest attempt at defense into a tangled, comedic disaster. The most infamous iteration of the Chains of the Damned was the dreaded three-legged gauntlet. In this cruel twist, participants were shackled in pairs, ankle to ankle, wrist to wrist, forced to fight as one grotesque, stumbling organism. With every step, each individual's panic dictated the other's footing. If one lunged left, the other was dragged off balance. If one stumbled, both collapsed, limbs flailing as their opponents, or the arena's engineered hazards, closed in. The crowd, of course, adored it. Every tumble, every mistimed swing of a weapon, every synchronized failure was met with uproarious laughter and deafening cheers. But beyond the absurdity, there remained genuine danger. The animals released into the arena were real, muscular, furious, bred for chaos. Lions stalked the edges, their golden eyes fixed on the flailing pairs. Snarling dogs, wolves, and once, to great controversy, an enraged wild boar with tusks like spears charged through the chaos, sending shackled participants sprawling. The combination of physical restraints, environmental hazards, and predatory animals created a battlefield where dignity evaporated, replaced by raw, desperate improvisation. Yet, amidst the engineered humiliation, stories of unlikely triumph occasionally emerged. Legends spoke of two condemned brothers, shackled together during a particularly brutal performance, who, through sheer instinct and years of working side by side as builders, synchronized their movements so flawlessly that they navigated the arena like a single, cohesive fighter. They evaded traps, outmaneuvered opponents, and even managed to fend off a starving leopard, earning a rare, thunderous ovation from the crowd and a temporary pardon from the amused emperor watching above. The Empire's architects of chaos, ever keen to escalate, layered further complexity into the chains of the damned. Some participants were blindfolded, forced to rely solely on the shouted, panicked instructions of their equally shackled partner. Others were given mismatched weapons, a long spear and a tiny dagger, a shield and a broomstick, turning coordination into a comedic impossibility. The floor itself became an unpredictable enemy, with hidden levers triggering collapsing sections, spring-loaded platforms sending participants airborne, and concealed pits opening beneath their feet, all designed to maximize both spectacle and suffering. Despite the absurdity, the event carried an unspoken message: the Empire's mastery over fate, freedom, and movement itself. The chains, physical or metaphorical, were symbols of control, reminders that even in the most chaotic performances, the rulers dictated the limits of autonomy. Participants struggled, stumbled, and occasionally triumphed, but every victory, every fall, every laugh belonged to those orchestrating the spectacle from the shadows of the grandstands. And so, the chains of the damned endured, a grotesque, hilarious, and brutally effective addition to Uruk's ever-growing arsenal of engineered calamities. It reinforced the Empire's unparalleled ability to transform suffering into entertainment, incompetence into artistry, and human failure into the centerpiece of public celebration, all under the approving gaze of thousands hungry for the next, inevitable disaster. For all the Empire's theatrical cruelty, the battles on sand, the mockery of myths, the flooded arenas and tangled chains, the rulers of Uruk still hungered for more layers to their empire of spectacle. It was not enough to orchestrate chaos behind stone walls. The obsession with performance and punishment seeped into every corner of public life. Thus emerged one of the strangest, most disturbing additions to the Empire's repertoire of entertainment: the market of misery. It was not an event confined to a single day or grand arena, but a sprawling, ever-present carnival of humiliation woven into the heart of the city itself, where punishment and performance were indistinguishable, and every street could become a stage for the Empire's peculiar brand of justice. The market of misery operated under the illusion of normal commerce. To the untrained eye, it resembled any bustling district within Uruk: stalls of fruit, artisans displaying wares, musicians plucking strings, and children darting between vendors. But beneath the surface, the district pulsed with controlled disorder, designed to turn both criminal sentencing and civic humiliation into a never-ending spectacle for the Empire's citizens. Here, punishments were not hidden behind prison walls. They were displayed for all to see, woven directly into the vibrant rhythm of the city's daily life. Condemned individuals, whether for theft, debt, or simply offending the wrong bureaucrat, were paraded through the market of misery, transformed into unwilling street performers by decree. Shackled, costumed, or adorned with exaggerated symbols of their alleged crimes, they were stationed along the cobbled roads, forced to enact punishments so theatrical they often teetered on the edge of farce. One debtor might be made to sweep the same patch of street endlessly, their broom replaced with a giant feather to ensure maximum ridicule. Another, convicted of insulting an official, might be clad in a grotesque caricature mask, ordered to sing praises of the Empire while passers-by tossed scraps at their feet. But the humiliation didn't stop at simple mockery. The market's organizers, ever innovators of discomfort, created interactive punishments designed to draw the crowd into the performance. Children were encouraged to play games that involved dunking offenders into vats of colored dye. Merchants offered discounts to those willing to participate in public shaming rituals, from pie-throwing contests to absurd reenactments of the condemned's supposed crimes. Even animals were enlisted, docile donkeys dressed in judges' robes, trained to nudge or trample tokens at the feet of those on display, determining their fate in a bizarre parody of justice. Perhaps the most notorious corner of the market of misery was known as the Alley of Echoes, a winding street where every few steps, The voices of hidden performers or mechanical contraptions mimicked the pleas, confessions, and sobs of those undergoing punishment. The sounds reverberated through the alley, blending reality with cruel exaggeration, ensuring that even long after a condemned individual's shift was over, their shame lingered in the air, repeated endlessly for the amusement of strolling citizens. Yet, as with all things in Uruk, the line between punishment and performance blurred so thoroughly that the market of misery became more than a site of justice. It became entertainment. Tourists from distant provinces flocked to witness the spectacle. Artists painted exaggerated renditions of the condemned, and poets composed verses that transformed these moments of suffering into comedic folklore. Vendors capitalized on the trend, selling miniature figurines of particularly memorable offenders, complete with caricatured features and absurd accessories that turned their downfall into merchandise. And as always, the empire's architects of spectacle ensured that every layer of absurdity served a deeper message. No one was beyond the reach of public control, and even the most mundane misstep could be weaponized into entertainment. The market of misery thrived not simply because it amused, but because it reminded the citizens of their precarious place within the empire's meticulously designed chaos. Every passerby, every participant, every merchant hawking novelty masks knew that they too could one day become the performance, their humiliation packaged for the crowd's insatiable hunger. But for all its absurdity, the market had a darker undercurrent. Whispers circulated of individuals punished not for genuine crimes but for political inconvenience, dissent disguised as disorder. Some of the most elaborate street performances were, in truth, carefully orchestrated character assassinations designed to dismantle reputations under the guise of civic amusement. And yet the crowd still laughed, still cheered, still tossed their coins and scraps, complicit in the empire's grand illusion that entertainment and control were one and the same. Thus the market of misery endured, a living, breathing extension of Uruk's obsession with performance, a grotesque street theater where every shameful stumble, every exaggerated punishment, every absurd act of civic justice wove into the empire's endless parade of spectacle, distraction, and the ever-present reminder that within these walls, even misery was part of the show. For all the roaring crowds, clashing weapons, collapsing platforms, and monstrous beasts that filled Uruk's endless calendar of chaotic events, there remained one spectacle so peculiar, so unnervingly different, that even the most seasoned spectators approached it with wary fascination. It was known as the spectacle of silence, a tradition born not from thunderous battles or grotesque punishments, but from the eerie, unsettling absence of sound. A performance where the empire's obsession with control manifested not through chaos, but through stillness, restraint, and the crushing weight of anticipation. And in true Uruk fashion, even silence became theater, weaponized for both psychological torment and public amusement. The arena, usually vibrating with the noise of stampeding animals, metallic clashes, and the deafening roar of thousands, transformed into an almost sacred stage of enforced quiet. Every creaking gate, every footstep, every shallow breath from the participants became amplified beneath the crushing expectation of silence. The audience was instructed upon entering. No shouting, no chanting, no rhythmic stomping, only watch, listen, and let the tension saturate the air like the dry heat rolling across the sand. It was a ritual of restraint for the masses and a test of absolute control for those within the arena walls. Participants were drawn from the same pools as other spectacles: condemned criminals, foolish volunteers, unfortunate debtors, and the occasional performer with a flair for exaggerated expressions. But unlike the chaotic, blood-soaked trials of the Chains of the Damned or the Hunt of Shadows in Sand, those chosen for the spectacle of silence faced a far crueler opponent: the crushing burden of expectation without release. Their task was deceptively simple: navigate the arena, complete a series of obstacles, and survive. But they were forbidden from making any sound. To stumble, to gasp, to cry out in fear or pain was to fail, and failure meant punishment both swift and theatrical. The arena floor, meticulously designed for maximum tension, was lined with traps engineered to provoke reactions. Jagged stones shifted beneath feet, concealed spikes threatened to pierce ankles, Mechanical constructs loomed overhead with sudden, jarring movements designed to startle. Wild animals, trained for unpredictability, roamed the edges, their snarls, growls, and clawed steps echoing unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. Every sensory detail was heightened. The scrape of sand beneath sandals, the creak of wooden platforms, the distant rustle of fabric as spectators adjusted in their seats. It was a performance where every sound, no matter how slight, risked triggering the wrath of the Empire's overseers hidden in the shadows. Those who failed to maintain silence suffered elaborate, humiliating punishments administered with the same flair for spectacle that defined Uruk's culture. Trapped beneath collapsing nets, doused with vibrant dyes that marked them as failures, or chased by mechanical constructs disguised as mythical beasts, the consequences were both immediate and mortifying. The crowd, though silent by command, communicated their delight through gestures, exaggerated hand waves, stomping feet, or the collective rising of arms to signal approval or disappointment. Even without words, the arena pulsed with energy, an undercurrent of barely restrained chaos waiting to erupt. The most legendary tales from the spectacle of silence spoke of those rare individuals who mastered the unnatural calm, navigating the labyrinth of traps and beasts with the grace of shadows. Their expressions stoic, their movements precise. These few, often remembered by name in whispered songs or etched into street murals, became icons of control, the embodiment of the Empire's ideal citizen, disciplined, silent, unwavering in the face of orchestrated adversity. Yet for every silent victor, 100 stumbled, gasped, or screamed, their failures feeding the Empire's appetite for humiliation disguised as civic celebration. Even the spectators, bound by the enforced silence, became part of the performance. They squirmed with anticipation, exchanged exaggerated glances, and communicated approval or scorn through choreographed hand signals taught before entry. The rulers, perched high above, reveled in the spectacle, a city of noise reduced to tense quiet, every breath and heartbeat magnified beneath the weight of controlled stillness. It was power displayed not through chaos, but through its deliberate suppression, a masterstroke of psychological manipulation woven seamlessly into the Empire's tapestry of elaborate performances. Yet, despite its eerie nature, the spectacle of silence thrived, drawing crowds as vast as the bloodiest gladiatorial matches or the most chaotic hunts. It provided contrast, a reminder that even amidst the Empire's relentless cacophony, silence could be just as deafening, just as thrilling, just as saturated with theatrical tension as the loudest roar of an arena packed with thousands. It was spectacle stripped to its rawest form, the delicate, unbearable dance between noise and restraint, control and collapse, all playing out beneath the unwavering, unblinking gaze of an empire addicted to turning every human weakness into a public exhibition. Thus, the spectacle of silence secured its place among Uruk's grandest, most peculiar traditions, a haunting, brilliant testament to the ruler's ability to turn even absence into entertainment, silence into dominance, and the quietest, most fragile moments into unforgettable chapters within the Empire's endless, brutal theater of life. In the heart of Uruk, beneath the scorching sun and amidst the towering stone walls weathered by decades of spectacle, the arena stood not merely as a monument to entertainment, but as a living, breathing altar to human failure, ambition, and the Empire's relentless obsession with performance. Across its blood-stained sands, generations had stumbled, fought, bled, and been humiliated, all for the singular, insatiable appetite of the masses and the cold, calculated amusement of those perched high above in the imperial seats. The arena was not just a place of punishment, it was the Empire distilled into its purest form, unpredictable, theatrical, brutal, and designed meticulously to keep the people watching, laughing, and fearing. As the final sun set on yet another cycle of grand games, the trials of the fallen, the hunt of shadows, the waters of ruin, the chains of the damned, and even the unnerving spectacle of silence, the city of Uruk did not rest. The cleanup crews, cloaked in the anonymity of their labor, swept the remains of shattered weapons, broken props, discarded masks, and forgotten dignity into the labyrinth beneath the arena. The tunnels stretched for miles, a hidden network of cages, pulleys, and trapdoors, maintained by generations of workers whose faces remained unseen, yet whose fingerprints were etched into every carefully timed disaster that played out above. It was here, in the labyrinth's shadows, that the true nature of Uruk's grand performances revealed itself. Every malfunctioning gate, every collapsing platform, every sudden eruption of sand or smoke was no accident, but a calculated twist in the Empire's sprawling script of spectacle. The architects of chaos labored tirelessly, perfecting mechanisms, breeding creatures of myth and nightmare, rehearsing new, ever more humiliating punishments designed to blur the line between theater and suffering. They understood what the crowds desired. Not fairness, not justice, but the intoxicating unpredictability of watching their fellow citizens falter, fall, and, occasionally, stumble into fleeting, improbable victory. Beyond the arena walls, the Empire's streets pulsed with the afterglow of yet another season of orchestrated disaster. Merchants sold relics of the games, miniature wooden replicas of the arena, crude carvings of infamous participants, and garish tokens that immortalized the most absurd or tragic moments witnessed within the amphitheater. Children reenacted their favorite scenes in alleyways, their laughter echoing with the same chaotic joy as the crowds who packed the stone benches. Even the city's poets, scribes, and musicians found endless inspiration in the arena's grotesque pageantry, their works weaving the events into the fabric of Uruk's collective memory. But beneath the revelry, the citizens understood, whether whispered in quiet corners or acknowledged only through wary glances, that the arena was more than entertainment. It was a stage where power flaunted itself, where rulers demonstrated their control over not only life and death but history, myth, and the very boundaries of human dignity. Every spectacle, no matter how absurd, reinforced the Empire's message. Within Uruk, chaos was choreographed, suffering was sculpted, and even your downfall could be curated into a masterpiece of public amusement. And so as the arena gates closed, as the last echoes of laughter, cheers, and gasps faded into the cooling desert night, the Empire's citizens drifted home beneath a sky heavy with stars, and with the knowledge that soon the games would return. New participants would stumble onto the sands, new beasts would be unleashed, new disasters meticulously designed to feel spontaneous would unfold before an audience starved for novelty. The cycle would continue, relentless, captivating, and saturated with the Empire's peculiar brand of controlled anarchy. The arena was eternal. The performances, no matter how tragic, comical, or cruel, were the Empire's heartbeat, a twisted celebration of spectacle disguised as civic unity. And whether watching from the shadows or standing in the arena's unforgiving spotlight, every citizen was part of the performance, some knowingly, others tragically unaware, all bound together by the Empire's unrelenting demand for entertainment at any cost. And now, as we close our own journey through the madness of Uruk's grand spectacles, I want to thank you, yes, you, for sticking with me through every absurd, brutal, and downright ridiculous moment. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient chaos, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But don't just subscribe, become part of this growing community where history, dark humor, and unbelievable true stories collide. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from? What was the craziest part of this tale for you? And if you have your own stories, moments from history, myths you grew up with, or just your wildest thoughts about ancient empires, drop them below. This is your space too, and together, we turn forgotten history into a shared spectacle of curiosity, laughter, and maybe a little wisdom hidden between the madness. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never forget, the past was far weirder than we ever imagined. See you in the next one.